Hey everyone, it's Kabir here. So in last session, we understood how the use state hook works, right? And we didn't describe hooks completely. So we will be understanding hooks step by step because in some tutorial, you will be finding introduction to hooks and they will be defining everything about the hooks in that particular session. The problem is like, if you don't know what hooks, what concepts you have the hooks, how can you understand how hooks is going to work, right? So like what I think is that you have to learn each and everything like one part you have to learn in the hooks and you have to define okay this is the hooks like this you will learn second part you will understand you will add one more point for the hooks. So if you are able to understand complete hooks step by step then at last you can define what is hook, right? So that's my approach. So it's fine. So now yesterday we saw that we have did right hooks we have understood and we have did the two examples using a class component. How can we increment a state variable and using a functional component? How can we maintain the state in the functional component? So that was the agenda of the last class. So let's see how it is going to be there. So I wanted to continue from the last class, like still we have one part pending in the use state. Like we have did two examples. I wanted to explain the third example. The third example, now this time we are going to send a request to the server and from server we are going to get the data and that data we are going to display. Okay, so let's execute last yesterday's code so that it would be very clear for us. So it's simple npm start npm start enter. So yesterday we have created two buttons, right? And this button is created using the class component, whereas this button has created using the functional component. And we have created one static file. Okay, in that we kept some data and that data first we have inserted. I mean, we have stored in our state. Then from that state we are displaying in our component. That was the flow was, right? Now this is class component, this is our functional component, and when we click the get data we are going to display some data in the form of card. So this was the example for us, right guys? So today what I wanted to do, so let's understand what we are going to do. Now this is our front end. Okay guys, this is our front end which we are designing in the React. So we can say it is a client side application. So we are designing in the React. In the same way, someone has designed server side as well. So we are not concerned what technology they have used, how they wrote the code. It doesn't matter to us. Only the thing matters us when we send a request, we should get the data. So let's consider they have constructed one server. Now, as a time being, let us understand they have created this particular server using the Node Express.js. Okay, guys, and we have one database as well. So some kind of database we have. Just consider it to be like something like a MongoDB. So we have the database, right? Some data is present in this particular database. So it will be like database. Now the data is present here, right guys? Now just consider this is our data and some data is present in our database. This is the data. Some data they have stored in the database. Now this data, this particular data which is in the database, I wanted to display in my client side application in the format of cards. Okay, so what we have to do first of all we have to send a request, right guys? First of all we have to send the request. That's nothing but from client to server, because this client application cannot communicate directly with the database. So we don't have any feature where our client application is going to directly communicate with this database. So that's why we require the help of server. Now what we have to do, we have to send the request to server by telling that I want this data. So I'm going to send a request to a server. Okay, how we have to send the request? Using the Axios, we use the Ajax concept, right guys? So I'm sending a request to the server by telling that I want this data. Now this server, what it will do, it will take this request and it will perform some operations here, then it will connect to your database, and it will, depending upon the request, it will fetch this data. It will ask this data to database. Now database is going to return you guys the data, right? Now it will return the data, it will return the data to your server. Now database is going to return the data to the server, right? Now server will perform some operations and it will return the data in the JSON format. Okay guys, it will return the data in the JSON format. So how data will be there, let me show you. So we will take the JSON placeholder example. So they gave us some URLs. So let's take user only. Okay, this is the user, right? Now this is the data which is stored in the database. Whenever we send the data, we are going to get in this format the data, right? Now just see, this is the array. Now array contains the element, right? Here each element is one object. It is the same way how we defined the yesterday in a static file. We have created one object. It contains one array as a value. In that array, it will contains collection of object where each object is going to represent one person. In the same way, they are going to return us this array, and this array contains objects. Now each object is going to define one person. So from here to here, this is the one person detail. So what details they are providing? Some ID, some name, username, email, address, his phone number, his company details, all that things we are able to see. Like this we have totally 1, 2, so totally I think 10. So we have the 10 employee details, right guys? Okay, fine. Now whenever I'm going to send the request, right, from here I'm sending the request to the this particular node. What node will do? It will connect to the database, it will fetch the data, it will give backs to us in this format. In this format the data is going to come. So what is our duty? Once we get that data, right guys, once we get that data, we are going to store in the state. So once we get that data, just consider this is as a state. So we are going to store the data in the state. Store the data in the state. So once we have stored the data inside the state, then automatically we can display this data in our component, right? The same thing what we have did yesterday. So just what we are doing, just we are sending the request, we are adding, additionally we are adding something like that, right? So let's come to our code. So this time let me create one more component. So inside the src I'm going to create a component called something like get server comp data component.js. Okay, now I want the snippet of our functional component. So React functional component export tab. So we got the snippet. Now we know that what we know, once we send the request and we are going to get the data, that data should be stored in the state. So it means first of all we required a one state. So how can we create a state? Using the use state, right guys? So first of all we have to import it. So use state. So okay, fine, we took the use state. So let me define the use state. So use state is a function, right? So use state is a function, so function has to be called. So we have called. Now initially we are getting the array like array data, so I'm going to give an initial value as an empty array. Okay, fine. Now this use state is going to return as an array, right? So const, it will return array which contains two elements. The first we have, first element should be your state. So I'll be saying something like info, and second should be a function which is going to update this state. So I'm going to say set info. Now it's totally depend upon you guys how you guys can write the names. You can write any name. So here I took the info and the set info, right? Fine. Now I wanted to send the request to the server. So that for that I required a Axios library. So guys, first of all, you have to install the Axios library. So I have already installed. So you guys have to install. So how you will install? npm install Axios. It's very simple. Just you guys have to do npm install Axios. That's it. Just enter Axios library is going to be installed, downloaded from your npm registry, and it is going to store in your node modules. Okay, fine. Now what I'm going to do, now I wanted to send the request, right? I wanted to send the request. So I will write that functionality in separate file. So for that, what I'm going to do, I will create one folder in src called src service. So this will be the service folder. In this service folder, I'm going to create one file known as server call.js. It's not a React component. It's a simple JavaScript function. So I wanted to use Axios. So first of all, we have to import, right? So import Axios from Axios. Okay, fine. We have imported. Now this is a library. It is a library means it is going to provide you set of APIs, means it is going to provide you set of functions. So now if you wanted to send a request and get the data, so by default this Axios library is going to provide you guys a function called get method, and that get method is going to take only one parameter, that is URL. So for that I'm writing one function. So I will be saying function get data. So this is the function. In this function I'm going to write Axios dot get. Now this get method is going to take one URL, the URL where you wanted to send the request, right? So for that I need URL. So this is our URL. So just copy here and come to your view and just paste. Now we are sending a request, right? Now whenever we send the request, so what is going to happen? Once you have sent the request, it will connect database, it will get the data, and it is going to return the data. It means this is going to return the data. Now this will return you the promise. So I have to handle that promise, right guys? So I don't want it to handle the promise here. So I will just return. I will write the return. Now this function I wanted to call from somewhere else, right guys? So I'm gonna save it. Okay, fine. Now comes to our get server data component.js, right? Now here I wanted to create one button. So simple button I will be creating button class equals to some bootstrap stylings. So I will be saying success btn success get data from server. That's it guys, the name of the it is, and I wanted to provide some margin, so I will be saying margin top 3. Okay, fine. Now I want to keep this particular component in my app.js. So let's come to the app.js and just comment all this. I have to first import it, right guys? So import. Now get server data component from components, and it's something but this one. Now I want this should be here. So just I'm going to copy it. Okay, fine. Now coming here, the initially whenever our component is going to load, right? Whenever our component is going to load, we are able to see this button. So let's see whether it is working or not. So come here. Now yes, now it is working, but we didn't wrote any logic, so it's not working. So now what we have to do? Simple. Now whenever I'm going to click on this button, guys, whenever I'm going to click on this button, whenever I'm going to click on this button, a request should goes to the server and get the data, and that data should be stored in the info. Now if you wanted to get the data, means we already wrote a function to send the data, means we have to call this function. So if we wanted to call this function from here, first of all we have to export this one. So let me export default and get data. So I'm going to export. So I want import. I will be importing here because from here I wanted to call that function. So import get data from its service, from here server call. Right, now we got this function. Now when we have to call this function, I have to call when I am going to click on this particular button, guys, right? So if I click on this button, this function is going to call and it is going to return us the data, but that data I wanted to store in a set info. So what I'm going to do, I will write one more function here. I will define one function. I will say update state. Okay guys, I am going to define. Now what this will do, it will update state. Means if you wanted to update state, you have to call the set info. So I need to call the set info. Okay, fine, but we have to pass that data, right? But that data is in the server, but how can we get, so after getting that data, then only we have to update, right? So before calling set state, I have to call the get data function. So I'm going to call get data function. Now this get data function is there, right? Whenever we are going to call, the control will comes to server call. Now this function is going to execute. Now it will call this particular Axios method and the request will goes to a server and it will come and it will return. So it will return means from where we have called, the data will come here. Once we got the data, we have to handle that promise. So then here, right, now we are going to get the data as a response. Now once we got that data, this data I need to update in the info. So what I will do, I will just remove from here this thing and I will keep here. So I will say just set info. Right, now the data is in response.data. So the response.data. Now our particular state has been updated with the data which we are getting from the server. Now this data I wanted to display in the format of cards. So initially our array is going to be empty, right? Initially our array is going to be empty. So what I'm gonna do, I will say info dot length. If info dot length is equals to 0, right? If it is equals to 0, then just say some div and I will be saying not div, let me take something like h3 and I will be saying data has to be loaded. Okay, now let me give some stylings to it. So I will be saying class equals to text center and some text color, text danger, some kind of color, right? If we got some data in the info, means this condition is going to be false, right guys? Once this condition is false, then I want to iterate. So what I wanted to iterate, it's very simple. I wanted to prepare a card. So how can we prepare a card? Are we getting any error? Okay, fine, we will adjust that one. So info dot length means this is an array. If the length is equals to 0, then display this particular text, or else you have to iterate. You have to say info dot map, and this map is going to take one callback function. Okay, it took one callback function. It is going to return something. Okay, we will handle that return as well. Now this callback function will take each and every element of this array. So first element is one object, right? So obj comma index. Fine. Now with each object I wanted to construct one card. So how can we construct a card? Using the card class in the bootstrap. So card deep. Now here I want a card header as well. So I will be saying card header and tab. Right, now in card header I want it should be something like h4 and I will be saying like employee details. That's it, guys. Now I want card body as well. So come here, just enter. So I want card body. So dot card body and tab. Now here I wanted to display the details. So what details we wanted to display? I wanted to display something like P. I will be saying P or something like H5. Let's take H5. And this time I will be saying here object dot id, the first thing. And I wanted to display more few fields, something like 4 fields. The next should be username. Next should be email, and one more should be his company name. So how the company name is going to look like? If you see, we have this object. Inside company, we have the name. So what we have to do? Simply, we have to say company dot name. That's it. Company dot name. Yeah, done. Now we have to save. Now come up. So we didn't get any error, guys, right? So as simple as it is. So what we have did, we have constructed one button. Okay, this is the button. We have constructed the button. Whenever our component is going to load, a button is going to be created, and we are going to get the message like data has to be loaded, right? Why we are getting this data has to be loaded? Because initially our state is empty. Our state is empty. This our state is there, right? Our state is empty with empty array. So we wrote a condition. What condition we wrote? We wrote if the length of this array, length of this state is 0, means we don't have the data, then just display this text. So once we get data, means we have some length. So this condition is going to be false. So once this condition is false, then execute this particular code. So now in this code, what we are doing, we are constructing a card using the map of JavaScript. So guys, you have to be familiar with the JavaScript bootstrap, as I have already suggested in the first video. So if you don't know that, and if you don't know the basic concepts of React, it will be very, very difficult, guys, to understand the concepts. So this is our thing. So now once we got the data, so when I'm going to click on this get data, so once I click on this get data, just wait, it's not working. Okay, fine. Let's see why it's not working. Now our requirement is whenever I'm going to click on that data, right? So why it is not working? Because we didn't call any function. So here, whenever I'm going to click on that function, I mean on that button, it should call this particular function update state. Now what update state will do? Internally it will call the get data. Get data is nothing but this function. Now what this function will do internally, it will call the Axios. Now once we got the data, now this function is going to return. To whom it is going to return? From where this function has called. So the function has called from here, so data is coming here, right? Now we are handling. Now once we are handling, we are updating the state. So whenever we are going to call set info, our component is going to re-render, right? It means this particular code is going to execute one more time. Now this time our info has some data, means length is not equals to 0. So this condition became false. If this condition became false, it will execute the code after this colon. So after this colon, we wrote some code. In this code, we are describing this code is written to construct a card using that data, right guys? So we have to configure that function. So here I'm writing on click function. In this on click function, I need to call which one? This one, right guys? Update state. So I will just say update state. Fine. Now initially we got has data has to be loaded. So once I click on this, we got the card. We got the data in the card. Now this data is nothing but see the one breed something like that, right? So one, this is the username, great. This is the ID, this is the email, and we have the company name. This is the company name. So we got the data in format of that. Now if you want to give some stylings for all this, you can give. So here I'm gonna say something like empty 3. Okay guys, now you can give some color like PG dark, text white. So come here. So initially we don't have any data. Once we have clicked here, now we got the data in the form of card. This is the card. So we didn't concentrate on designing. Our main aim is that the data should come from the server. Now data is getting from the server. Now this is the concept of use state. So we saw the 3 scenarios, guys, right guys? We saw the 3 scenarios. In the first scenario, what we have did, we have just updated the state value. We know how to create the state. Now how can we update a state? That simple example we saw. In the second, we have created a static file. This is our static file. Now here in this scenario, we have the data in our client application only. The data is present in client application. Now this data we are displaying in the form of card. In the third scenario, our data is present somewhere in the database, somewhere in some database, right? From this database, we are displaying this particular data in the and displaying in the format of a card. So these are the 3 scenarios. So first example was little simple, second was little complicated, third was more complicated than the second. So I hope use state concept has to be very clear. The simple agenda of use state is nothing but how we can maintain a state in a functional component. So this is the actually real-time example where you guys are going to do. Some data will be present in your database. Now just if you consider e-commerce, right? If a employee has added some data in add cart, right? We have the add cart. So you have like added some items, some products that you wanted to purchase in an add cart. So that add cart data is present in your database, right? So whenever you are going to click on that add cart button, right? So you should able to see all the products that you have added, right? So whenever you are going to click on that button, a request is going to the server. Then it will just do some logic and it will connect to the database and it will fetch the data only which you have added in the cart. That data will come to the server. Now that data will be stored in one component, that is nothing but your add to cart component. In that component, in state it is going to store. Then from that state it is going to display all the details of your added cart. So all the details of your product which you have added in the cart. So this is one of the real-time scenario. So I thought it's will be very better if I'm going to explain this kind of example. So that's all guys for use state. Okay, so now let's remove this one. So I'm gonna remove all this. This time let me get rid of these things. So now once we have exited, nothing is there. Okay, fine. Now we are going to understand about the use effect. Now what is use effect? We have the second hook. Now hook are nothing but a simple functions, guys, right? Now let us understand about the use effect. Now use effect is a simple function. Now why they have introduced a use effect? Now in the class components, you have some lifecycle methods like component did mount. We have some lifecycle methods like component did update. We have get derived state from props. We have one more like component will unmount. Now what is this lifecycle methods? These are the functions which are going to trigger during the life cycle of your component. Now, what is the meaning of life cycle of your component? The component, once it started ready to load in your browser, right? Once it is ready to your load, from that time to the time when we are going to remove that component from our web page or from our browser. This period is called lifecycle method. Now, in this period, at particular phase, at particular time, some functions are going to be triggered, and that functions are going to be triggered by itself. Means React is going to call that functions. Explicitly, we are not calling any lifecycle methods. So if you wanted to perform some operation at that particular phase, then we will write that particular logic in that particular component lifecycle method. As simple. Lifecycle method is nothing but it is a time period from the time it's ready to load in the browser, from there to the time where we are going to remove that particular component from the browser. Okay, this time period is called life cycle. So during this time life, during this life period, lifetime, some methods are going to trigger. That methods or that functions are called your life cycle functions, right? Now, depending upon our requirement, we are going to write some kind of logic in that particular functions. Okay guys, that's the thing. Now, in class component, we have many more lifecycle methods. Now, that was not present in the functional component. Like if you wanted to do some server call, like whenever your component is going to load, right? Now, in this example, whenever we click on that button, then our data is loading. But my requirement is whenever the component is loaded, my data should load it. Like my data should be loaded from the database. In our requirement, we click the button, then the data is coming here, like then the data is loading. But my requirement is whenever I'm going to start this application, right, whenever the application is going to load, that time only the data should come. Like such, in such kind of scenario, you have to go with the lifecycle methods. So before 16.8, you don't have any facility or a feature in functional components, so you have to be forced to go with the class component. But from 16.8, they have introduced the hooks concept. So in that, one of the hooks is use effect. Now this hooks is going to handle your these three life cycle methods of class component. Means if you wanted to use this lifecycle methods, we can use in the functional component using the use effect hook. Now that is the agenda. Now this use effect hook, how it is looks. So use effect is a function, so let's call a function. Okay, fine, this is a function. Now this function is going to take one callback function. Now if you write something like this callback function is going to be treated as component did update. So whatever logic you will write in this function, right, you will write some logic, right guys? Now this logic will be executed whenever a component is going to update. Whenever you are going to update your component, this particular logic is going to execute. This particular function is going to trigger. Now, in the same way, if you wanted to use component did mount, so when this particular function is going to trigger once your component is loaded, like once in class component, once you call that render method, after that, this particular function is going to be loaded, triggered. In the same way, component will unmount will be triggered once you are ready to remove your component from the browser. If you wanted to remove that component, so before removing that component, this particular callback or this particular life cycle method is going to be triggered. Now how can we represent? First of all, component did mount in use effect. Now we saw how can we represent component did update, right? Component did update is nothing but it will take one callback function. Now, if you want this callback function to be behave as component did mount, you have to pass second parameter for this use effect. So the callback function is the first parameter. So comma, you have to give an empty array or you have to mention some kind of data here. If it is going to see something array here, right, then it means this particular callback method is going to behave as a component did mount. If you remove, if you just pass only callback function, then this function is going to behave as component did update. It's a slight difference, right? Now this function is going to return something, right? And it will take one more callback function. Means before ending this particular use effect flow, it will execute this function, right? Now this function is going to behave as a component will unmount, because suppose you have a requirement where you wanted to remove that component. So before removing that component, you wanted to give some message to the client. Okay, that message you have to write here. So before removing the component, it will trigger and it will notify your user. That's the thing we have to do. So this is a syntax of use effect. So let's go with the basic example and understand it very clearly through the code. So for that, I'm going to create one more component. So let's come here. So let me delete it. In the component, now here I'm going to say second component dot JS, some name of the component I have give. So now what I wanted to do, I wanted to create a functional component. So for that, what is the snippet? The snippet is very simple, guys. What is the snippet? Just you have to say React functional component export tab. Now okay, we got. Now I wanted to use effect. So first of all, we have to import. So I'm going to import it, use effect. Now I require even use state, so I will import use state as well. Okay, fine. Now I wanted to, what is my requirement is, I wanted to create one button the same way what we have created in the first example using the use state. So I need one state. So we are going to say use state. Initial the value will be 0. Now it is going to return an array, const array equals to. Now this array is going to contain two elements. First is your state, second is your set state function, which is going to update your state. Fine. Now here I wanted to create one button. So button, I will be saying class equals to something like btn dark, or we can say btn light, some kind of button. Okay, function. Now here I will be saying like clicked times. So this time here I'm going to mention like state, right guys? I'm going to mention the state. So initially the value will be 0. I'm gonna just save. So first of all, I wanted to use in the app, so I have to import it. So I will be saying import second component from components. It will be second component. So I have to mention here, it will be second component. Now I will be saving it. So I wanted to give some margin as well. So I will be saying like mt3, something like that. Fine, let's come here and just see. So before we need to execute it, so I'll be saying just npm start. Okay, now we got the button, but we are not able to see any kind of color because it is a light color. So let me change it to something like bg, what will say secondary. Yeah, now we got some kind of button. So my requirement is whenever I'm going to click, right, whenever I'm going to click, it should update the state. But my requirement here is you are able to see a title, right? This title should be changed. So what I'm going to do, I will just say document dot title. Here this time I will be saying simply backticks. First of all, I have to use the backticks. Now in this backticks, I will say title changed right? Dollar, and here state times. Just save it. Now come here and you are able to see the change in the title. So title spelling title. So now this title has changed 0 times. Now this is our setup, right? Just a second, guys. Yeah, title is changed, but we are able to see something like this here, right? I wanted to remove this one. So nothing we have to do. Just come to the code and just keep this out of your. So let me keep here and let me remove this div. Save it. Now still. So let me keep this outside. So we got, okay. So I want this to be, okay, removed. So we have the button. So now my title has to be changed, right guys? So if we keep here, we are going to get something like this here. So let me come here and just let me save it. Okay, now we got something like this. Now I want that particular thing in the title. So I want to keep that code not in the written, because if I keep in the written, like if I'm keeping here, now what is the drawback we are getting? We are getting here, we are getting the title here also. So I don't want it to keep in the render. So I wanted to keep this particular code in the component did mount in this particular method. Why I wanted to keep, once my component is loaded, right? Once my component is loaded in the browser, okay, now this particular title has to get changed. That's my requirement. So what I'm gonna do, I will come here and use the function called use in use effect. Okay, so I will tell use effect is a function. So I'm going to say use effect. Now this function is going to take one callback function. So this time I will say this is a callback function. Now I want this function should be behave as a component did mount. So simply I will say comma this one, right? Now here I will be saying that particular code. So here I will be saying document dot title equals to, so title changed, so dollar, and this time it should be state times, right guys? Now this is the empty. Okay, now this is our empty array, guys. Okay, now I'm gonna save it. Now if you see, now we got the result what we are expecting. Now we got this one, now we got this one, but guys remember, this thing is executing after the component is loaded. Means this particular method, this callback method is executing once the component is loaded. That's because of here. Now just consider I'm gonna remove this one, right? I'm gonna save it. Now let me stop this one and let me end this particular process. The first time it is going to load. See, now component is loaded. Now this particular thing has been executed. Is nothing but your component did mount. Now I want, whenever I'm going to click on this button, right? Whenever I'm going to click on this button, it means we are executing the set state method. When means we are going to execute the set state. So once we have executed the set state, it means this component is going to re-render. If this component is going to re-render, it means this particular function is going to execute one more time or not. Now, just for being for time being, just consider this is your uh, component did mount. Now it should be executed as a component did mount, and we know that in lifecycle method, component did mount is going to execute only one time. It is going to execute only one time. Now just see, I'm going to write one event here, on click event. So I'll be write on click, and this time I'm gonna say update my state whenever I'm going to click on this button. So it's a set state, and just say state plus 1. So I'm saying whenever I'm going to click on this button, a state should get executed. So once I have clicked, state is executing, but this particular function is not executing. Why it is not executing? The only reason is that this particular function, right, this callback function is now behaving as a component did mount, and we know that component did mount will execute only for one time, that when your component is going to load it. Now, once you are updating your component, that component did mount will not execute. That's what you have learned in the lifecycle method of the class. Now see, this particular title is not changing because this particular title, the code where we wrote that behaves as a component did mount. Now I want this particular thing should not behave as a component did mount. It should execute as a component did update. We have the one more life cycle method, right guys? We have one more, is nothing but component did update. Now this will execute each and every time your component is going to update, means each and every time your state is going to update, right? So what I'm gonna do, I will just end this process here, right? Now just see, I will execute this particular thing once again. So what we have did here, now what changes we have did? We have just told, we have removed the array, means now we are telling this function should behave as a component did update, means this function should execute each and every time when the state is going to update, right guys? So I will say npm start. So whenever I'm going to click on that button, state is going to update, means this particular value should also get updated. Now, right, just remove it and come here and just say, now see the value is updating here as well. Now it means that this particular method, this particular function is behaving as component did update. Now suppose I kept the array here, means if we kept an empty array, then we are telling that this particular function should behave as a component did up, component did mount, component did mount. So come here and just refresh. Now once we have refreshed it, so first time when I'm going to click, one is updating, but this is not updating. The only reason component did mount is going to execute only one time, whereas your component did update is going to execute each and every time whenever you are going to update your state. That's the thing. Now we have one more life cycle, that is component will unmount. Now when that function is going to execute, once your application, once your component is going to remove from the DOM, nothing from your document, right? So for that, what we are going to do, simply we will say return. Okay, just return it. I'm going to remove here from this one, and this return will take one call, one function. That function is going to behave as your component will unmount, right? So how can we understand? Just I will write one alert. Okay, now this time I'm gonna say component unmount is triggered. That's it guys. So what do you mean by re-rendering? Re-rendering is nothing but the component will be removed, again it will be rendered, right? It will remove and it will be added. So whenever the component is removed, right? Whenever the component is removed, this function should get executed. So I'm going to save it, come here. Now just see, we have the 0 0 times. Once I have clicked on this button, it means it is going to call set state. Set state means it will first remove this component, then it will render the component. So once it is ready to remove, that time only alert should come. We wrote a alert, right guys? Alert should execute. So let's come here and just say click. Now you got alert. Component unmount is triggered. Still our component is not finished. I'm gonna say 1. Now see the 1, right? Now if I click, it should be 2, but it should be 2. When it will be 2? Once the component is loaded, right? Once component is loaded, but our component unmount should trigger before removing this component. So once the component should be loaded means first it should be removed, right? So before removing, a function is going to trigger. The function is triggered, the value is still 1. It means component is not removed. Still we get an alert. So once we tell okay, the component is going to be removed, it is going to re-render, then this component will update method is going, component did update is going to execute. Now component did update is executed. Now this is the concept of your use effect. Now this is a simple concept. Now here we have understood what is the concept, like how these methods are going to trigger, because people are going to get confused when this function is going to behave as a component did update, when this component is going to behave as a component did mount, and when it will behave as a component will unmount. So will unmount is very clear in written. If you are giving some function, it will as a component will unmount. So it is clear cluster, right? Now we are having the confusion, this callback function when it will behave as a component will, a component did update. So if you won't give any second parameter for use effect, then it will behave as a component did update. If you give some second parameter, like here I am giving some empty array, means you gave some second parameter. Once you gave the second parameter, use effect will understand, okay, I have a second parameter, so this function should behave as a component did mount. So this is the difference. Okay, now this thing we have did. Now let me clear this one. Now let's understand a real scenario why we go for this lifecycle methods. Now my requirement is, guys, whenever my component is going to load, this particular data is there, right? JSON placeholder data. We have this data, or post, we can use the post as well. So I have this post data, right? This data should display in the format of table once my component is loaded. That's my requirement. Okay, so how can we do? We know that component did update is going to trigger only one time. Okay, once the component is loaded, it means it is fulfilling our requirement. So my requirement is once the component is loaded, data should display in table format. Component did mount will execute only one time when the component is loaded, right guys? So let's come here. So I want, okay fine, let me create one more component. This time I'm gonna say second server comp .js. Okay, now I want a functional component. So React functional component export tab. Okay, we got it, this one. Now I want two hooks, like I want use effect and use state. So use state comma use effect. So we took the two components. So we know that whenever the data is going to come from the server, it should store in the use effect. So I will create one use effect, sorry, use state. So initially it will be the empty array. Fine. Now here I want to say const array equals to. Now it is going to return some data. Now it will contain one more set data. Okay, fine. Now we have created a use state. Now I want use effect as well. So I will be saying use effect. Okay, now this is the function. Okay, fine. Now this is going to take one callback function. So this is arrow function. Okay, fine. This is the callback function. Done. Now my requirement is whenever this is array, right? Whenever this is empty, then this is the data dot length. When it is the empty, it should say same like that. h2 some class equals to, I'm gonna say text some kind of color. So let me take as a danger, and I will be saying simply text center. Let me take text should be center as well, and just I'm going to say data has to be loaded. Simple, right guys? Now once I get the data in state, now once the length is more than 0, then it should execute this particular thing. Means it should construct a table depending upon the data I have in the state. So data is in data, right? Data dot map, and this time map is going to function. It will take one more callback function. Simple, it is going to return something. Okay, fine. Now it is going to return something, and in data we have objects as each element. So it will iterate each and every element. So I will say element, and it will be index. Okay, fine, right? Now what I wanted to do, depending upon the data, now this is the data, right? Now each object should be one row. So I have to construct the row. So to construct the row, first of all, I should have the table, right? So I will say just table. Okay, fine. In this table I have a tr. In first tr I want th. Now the first th should be user id, then title, user id and title. I need just user id and title. So what I will be saying, just I will say user id and one more is title. So th, this time I will say title. So a predefined, it is going to trigger. So just I will remove this table from here, and I need to keep before the div. So table is already constructed. Now what we wanted to do, whenever we are going to get the data, it will have some objects. So each object has a one row. So please construct one row. So I will say tr, construct a row. In this tr, I need one td. Okay. And I need one more td. Okay, fine. Now the first td should display the id. So the id is nothing but element. It is present in the element. So I'm going to say element dot id. So let's see the syntax. It's user, okay, it's a id. I'm going to take this particular value id, and I will need a title. So I will take here title dot, sorry, it's not title, it's like element dot title. That's it guys, it's like element dot title. Now what we did, once we get the data, so data is going, this particular state is going to fill the data, so length automatically will be more than 0. So this condition is going to be false. So if this condition is going to be false, then just execute the logic which is present after this colon. So this particular logic is going to execute. Now what this logic is going to do, it will just construct the each and row depending upon the elements, depending upon the data that we have inside this particular state. So I know everybody will be familiar with the map method, how it works, right? If you guys don't know how the map method is going to work, we already made a video on this. You can go on the React playlist and you can see a separate video for the map, how it is going to be executed. Already we have explained there. Right, fine guys. Now this index is not needed for me, so I can remove this index as well. So that's not a big deal. So my requirement is whenever this component is going to load, right? So a request should go to the our server. So to go to the request, already we have created a file in service, right? So I want this function should get executed. I just wanted to change this particular URL from users. I want the URL should be post. So I will just copy this URL and paste here. Now these functions I required here, right? So first of all, I have to import it, guys, right? I have to import it. So I'm gonna just import it. So import get data from, so I will say services, from services, it's server call. So I'm going to get data, right? I got this function. Now I wanted to call this function. When this function is going to be called once my component is loaded, means I should call this function from component did mount, because component did mount is going to execute itself once the component is loaded. So in use effect, when it is going to behave as a component did mount once we pass a second parameter. So here I'm passing an empty array. Once we have passed the second parameter, then this particular callback function which is in use effect is going to behave as a component did mount. So here what I will do, I will just call get data. Now once I have called the get data, it is going to return me the promise. So I have to handle it, right? So I will be calling then. Now it will take one more callback function. Okay, fine. It will be the response. Now once I get the data, I want this data to be in the set data. So this time I will say set data, inside set data response dot data. That's it, guys. Now why I have used a component did mount, but why not component did update? We know that component did update is going to execute each and every time your component is going to be rendered, re-rendered. So but I want this request should execute only one time, when the first time my component is going to load. That's why I have used component did mount, because component did mount will execute only one time, whereas your component did update will execute each and every time you are going to update your state. That's the thing, guys. Now I have saved it. Now once, so we are going to call get state. So that's it, guys. Now I have to import this particular component in app.js. So for that, what I'm going to do, just I will say import what is our second server comp from components, and it should be second server comp. And here I'm going to say just second server comp. That's it, guys. Now once I have stored, now come here. Now you got the data once you have executed. So see, now our application is running. Whenever I'm going to execute my application, see, just see. But we don't know whether this particular component is, this particular method is executed after loading or not. So we know that this is going to load after loading of your component. So I'm going to give just alert here, and I will say a method message component is loaded, send request. Just save it, come here. Now see, our component is already loaded, right, guys? Now if I say okay, now we got the data from the server, means we are going to send the request to the server. Now I want a proper structure, so just I'm going to give some bootstrap classes for the table. So just give class equals to table, and I will say table hyphen striped, and let me give table dark. Now let's see how it is going to be there. Okay, now we got user data and title. Now this data we got from the server. It means in this example we saw, whenever my component is going to load, I wanted to show some data to the user. So this is how we can show. So in real time scenario, guys, when we are going to use, just consider you are an admin. You are an admin of your application. Okay. Now some users are registered in your application. So just consider some 100 users are registered. Now you have component where you wanted to see all the users, right? So whenever you are going to start your application as an admin, all the details of user should be displayed in your document in table format. Means you are not doing any operation, you are not clicking any button or something, like just you are executing the application. Once you have executed the application, a request should go to the server from their database, and it should take all the registered user data, and it should give return to the server. From server it should come to the React application, and it should display in the table format. Right, guys? Now if you wanted to send a request, right, once your component is loaded, means you have to write that particular logic in component did mount lifecycle method. So before 16.8 we don't have any hooks, so we cannot do in functional component. So if you wanted to do such requirement, you have to go with the class component. But once hooks are introduced, now you can do that kind of requirement, or you can fill that kind of requirement in using the use effect. So you can get same behavior like component did mount. So that's the concept of your use effect hook. So finally we have completed the two hooks, use state and use effect. Now this is the concept of your use state and use effect. Now the next class will be on next Saturday, where we are going to see many more hooks that is been provided by your React. Okay, so that's all, guys. Thank you for watching the video, and guys, please comment your views on these sessions, so at least we can know that okay, where we are doing any mistakes. If you guys uh, tell us like what we are doing, it is good, bad, whatever it might be, just comment it so that we can analyze ourselves and we can improve. So that's the only request, guys, for you. So thanks, guys. Take care.